Um, there's there's Shelley Fabary's Johnny Angel. That just uh, she's just another icon, and it's one of my favorite songs. It's one of the greatestly just sung beautifully, like captures that teenage girl um to a T. It goes how's it go? It's gonna take me like just like before forever to remember. Um, it goes, I'm in heaven, I get carried away. I dream of him and me, and how it's gonna be. Other fellas call me up for a date, but I just sit and wait. I'd rather concentrate on Johnny Angel, 'cause I love him. Oh, I love that song. Johnny Angel, you're an angel to me. Da 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 da. Johnny Angel, you're an angel to me. I love that. That one is iconic. Oh my God, Gene McDaniels is another icon of the early '60s. He has one of my favorite songs. I think it's the one of the most romantic songs ever. I get that it's very heterosexual, and but that doesn't mean that it's like discriminating or anything like that. It just means that that's just what he happened to be singing about. And it's the most beautiful song about, love, and about a man and woman in love, and about God create, like, you don't have to be religious or yada yada to love it. It's just so romantic. It's not about being religious or anything. It's just so romantic at the concept and the thought. You know what I mean? And it's just about like God creating the ultimate soulmate woman for this man, and him loving her that so much. And it's called 100 pounds of clay, meaning because she only weighs 100 pounds. So he takes like 100 pounds of clay to make his life complete by making her, because he was just a man and lonely. Almost like an Adam and Eve thing, but it's just the most romantic song ever, and it's iconic. So I want to sing that one. It goes, how's it go? He took 100 pounds of clay. I can't remember how it goes. And I know the song by heart too, which is so funny. That, like any other time. He took 100 pounds of clay, and then he said, hey, listen, I'm gonna fix this world today, because I know what's missing. So he rolled his big sleeves up, and a brand new world began. He created a woman and lots of loving for a man. Whoa, yes he did, with just 100 pounds of clay. Now can't you just see him walking round and round, picking up, or how's it go? Can't you just see him walking round and round, thinking, or picking up something from the ground, thinking just what he should do to make a living dream like you. He rolled his big sleeves up, and a brand new world began. He created a woman and lots of loving for a man. Whoa, yes he did, with just 100 pounds of clay. So, I can't remember right now on the spot, but Gene McDaniels, 100 pounds of clay. Oh. Okay, real quick, I want to do one other song because it's one of my favorites. She's the teen idol from back then, the early '60s, of one of many that I have to cover. So remember, there's gonna be like 30. Oh my God! So we're just getting started with this part one. This is gonna be a whole series. So you're gonna discover so much, and I know you guys are gonna love all this awesome music once you listen to it all. If you just didn't know. So Marcy Blaine's song "Bobby's Girl" is the, what do you call it? The ultimate anthem, the ultimate, like, bottling in a bottle the full teenage girl experience. And it's like I'm going through it right now myself, even though I'm not a teenager, transitioning, you know, fully transitioning, like really having the female estrogen hormones going crazy. I know exactly. You start to listen to all these songs, and you start to really, you get where they're coming from, and it hits right here with Butterflies. These songs are so romantically sung and really capture like she really is that girl. When you listen to it, it puts you right in that place, just like a great movie. You get sucked right in. So it's the song Bobby's Girl, and it goes, and I like how it has it's cute how it has like the guys almost like being a parent, and it's almost like a metaphor of all the pressure of like everyone in her life, um, like teachers, parents, and everything saying like, you're not a kid anymore, you need to grow up, so, and everything, and put all that stuff aside. So it's like, so it's got this neat kind of like intro at the beginning where it's like, so, okay. You're not a kid anymore. You're not a kid anymore. How's it go? Oh, wait, hold on. Okay. Like I said, I know all these songs, but for some reason, when I'm on the spot, my mind goes blank. But I could just sing them in the shower and know them all by heart. That's the beauty of all the songs back then. They're so catchy that you could learn like you could know 400 songs. So it goes like, you're not a kid anymore. You're not a kid anymore. Almost like and there's actually a music video to it, so don't think that they didn't exist then. Yeah, that's another misconception. So you're not a kid anymore. I know just what to say. I answer right away. I know just what I've been dreaming of. I wanna be Bobby's girl. I wanna be Bobby's girl. That's the most important thing to me. And if I was Bobby's girl, if I was Bobby's girl, what a loving, faithful girl I'd be. Each night I sit at home, hoping that he will phone. But I know Bobby has someone else. You're not a kid anymore. But I can't remember it. But in my heart I pray that soon will come the day that I'll have Bobby all to myself. I wanna be Bobby's girl. I wanna be Bob. So it's like that. And it's just the cutest thing. But not only that, like it puts you in that what that's like. You know what I mean? To really like someone so bad and like just want to hang out with them and prove the millions of songs like that, and they're just awesome. So I wanted to give example of her, Marcy Blaine. There's just everybody. Okay, so I've been thinking and thinking like, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna do this whole series on music, because there's so much to cover. I mean, we're going from 1955 when things are really beginning to change. It's almost like a renaissance, because it's like, it's kind of like how, okay, so then you're thinking like, oh, before rock and roll and all that, music was just slow, and that's how everything was before then, so there's no point of listening to it. And it's like, that's not true. Rock and roll is really like not a new concept. It's really born in a evolution out of like big band in the 30s, big band music like that, and swing music, which is very swing music. If you ever seen in old jazz clubs and in movies, it's very fast, like, and very a lot of like da, 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 drum. It's very look up 30s swing music. There's artists like Fats Waller and things like that. So we're gonna do the 30s and all that stuff too. But I really want to go just into the start of rock and roll into 55, into the right before things change in the going into the mid 70s or early 70s. So I really want to stop at like 73, 72, 73. And that's because you're probably wondering why. It's like, well, in the late 60s, early 70s, that's really like your not only your hippie revolution, and I'm not talking about just songs like about psychedelic. I'm not talking about just psychedelic stuff and stuff like that. I'm talking about like in the mid 60s to late 60s and early 70s, there was a barrier broke down where now artists were able to like really even more so be themselves, when before they had to kind of like be a little bit more conservative and like maybe just wear a suit. And you'll see a lot of in the 50s and 40s black artists and all the famous black bands like the Platters and all that, where they're the guy groups. They slicked back their hair and almost straightened it, like for it to be like more like Caucasian hair, things like that. But in the mid 60s, like 65, that's really when you're what they call the hippie revolution, but it's really just the sexual revolution. It's just the revolution of where artists started really being able to be themselves a little bit more in the image. It's not that the music's any better or anything like that, because early 60s I think is the most beautifully dramatic, theatrical, romantic, where it's almost like a play, where when they're singing the lyrics and how passionate and high the singing is, it sounds like they mean what they say, like they're acting out the part of the character that they're playing. Because in the early 60s and late 50s, a lot of it is love music, and it's a lot of it where they would play a gimmick. They would almost be a gimmick, and they would run with that, and they would stick to being that character in the songs, and they would tell like little stories and everything of heartache or heartbreak in the teenage experience, like going through puberty and all that. And then just when you listen to it, you feel butterflies and all that, and you feel like it. They bring it to life so real, like when you watch a movie and you really get into it like it's real, and they kind of capture that. That's how the love music and all the music and all that love music in the late 50s and early 60s is. They hit these high notes, and they're passionate, and they become the gimmick, and they sell almost like they mean what they're saying in the lyrics, whether they're getting dumped or whether they love a boy that they can't get or something like that, or there's cheating involved. Like, so it's brilliant. But then in 65, it's not that the music is so much better. It's just that the artists really kind of were able to be themselves by the image. The images weren't so so strict by the record company, like, oh, you have to wear a suit and you have to have this image. Like Marvin Gaye, for example. He's an example though of becoming more out and more taboo with his lyrics and everything, because at first in the early 60s and all that, he was like he just did your nice love songs, which are great. And then when you get to the mid and later 60s, and then he has songs more like basically just talking about the times, where it's like in the like 65 it's on, it's like, hey, just like with TV shows and music, or like where TV shows where, like how I was talking about in the Star Trek video, where Star Trek was really the first show in 66 to really start talking about racial issues before anybody was doing it. Because before that, there were no shows like The Jeffersons talking about racism and all that. Star Trek, ironically, is the first show to do that. You couldn't do that before. Couples couldn't even be in the same bed in shows like that, like on Bewitched and shows like that. Like I was talking about how Star Trek really revolutionized that for TV. But for music, it was really like Marvin Gaye is one in the mid 60s, where all of a sudden he stopped wearing that suit, that clean cut image. He grew his beard, where now it's like, now you're allowed to have beards and grow your hair out longer. And that's where the long hair on guys came about, because it's not that they didn't want to, it's just that they couldn't have that image. And this is now I know what you're thinking, like, oh, well then why are you selling this time period like it's so strict? Like, no. The music is beautiful, and it's not repressed. I'm going to go into how that's a big stereotype about when people think of 50s music and they think of early 60s, they think like, oh, it's just all bubbly love songs or dull or not going into anything dark or deep or real it's like, actually there's many tragic songs about cheating, about like just a loveless marriage where you just get where your wife falls in love with another man because you're always working all the time and you're not paying attention. You just kind of get into a funk. That happens to so many of us. It's happened to me. So people have the wrong idea. It's actually the greatest era in music ever because it has the most variety you could possibly think of. You know how like now when you think of music genres, you think like, oh, there's pop, and then there's rock, and then there's rap and whatever, and hip hop. It's like back then there was a million different things going on at once. There were different gimmicks where they would be like a movie character or a TV character where they would be the gimmick. There was also so many different genres of music that were a style. Like I'm sure you heard of the Beach Boys and how they have those surf songs like Surfin' USA and all that. Well, they're actually one of. They're not just like they invented it. See, what it is it's just like any genre. You know how like you have a genre like boy bands where there's not just the Backstreet Boys, there's NSYNC, there's 98 Degrees. There's more than one that were big in their era. Well, that's how it was here. See, what happened is that nowadays, because the radio, pop culture, TV, the mall, when you go to the mall and you see t-shirts of bands, what do you see? You only see the Beatles and you only see like Doors and Led Zeppelin. So then people that are my age and younger, or 40 years old and younger, think that that's all there was and they don't know anybody. And then they're missing out on all these great legends and all the true stars that were a big star back then. Everybody has this misconception thinking if I never heard of someone, that means they couldn't have been famous. It's like, that's a big misconception. What happens is that if the mall, if TV, if radio, if all your sources don't talk about something, how are you going to know about it? They're going to become erased. They could be the biggest star in the world. But if you never heard of them, then they're not. Then they get lost in time, and that's why I'm doing this video. So that's what always would drive me crazy is that people would be like, I'll tell people I'll be like, oh, I like the oldies, I like 60s music, and they'll be like, oh, just the Beatles. It's like they only know a couple of people, and I don't know an analogy. It'd be like if like 60 years from now, our grandchildren like went to the mall, if there's even a malls around by then, and like go into like one of those stores like Hot Topic and stuff. You know how they have the band shirts on the wall and you only see like a couple? It's like with rap. There's only three rappers ever mentioned, ever. Tupac, Biggie, and Eminem. But yet there's all these other big legends that were huge, millions of #1 hits, biggest stars, and no one talks about them anymore. They're like forgotten. And if you go to the mall, you only see t-shirts of Tupac and Biggie and Eminem. You see my point that just because a band is not shown anymore on TV or at the mall or anything doesn't mean that they weren't huge or just as big as the Beatles. It just means that they're getting forgotten through time because all the media and all the corporations and everything that run everything aren't showing you them. So then you don't know about them. So I'm going to show you everybody that was the biggest star with billions of #1 hits, were the legends of the 60s, and all of a sudden no one's talking about them. So what was my analogy? It'd be like if people in their 30s or something 60 years from now, when the 90s are like 60 years ago or 7 years ago, just like the 50s, and so then they're like, oh, I know 90s music. There's just there's just Nirvana and the Backstreet Boys, and they don't know anybody else. That's what happened to the 60s. People only know Elvis, the Beatles. It's like, oh yeah, out of a whole giant decade, which is the most influential, most important decade in the late 50s in the history of our pop culture, or our whole culture, that's all people know about. So I just think it's such a waste. So I'm not doing this series to put anybody down for not knowing this or anything. And I'm not trying to be like a downer. I'm trying to say like, hey, check out everybody, because if you like the Beatles, you'll like everybody else from the same time period. And you'll love everybody. And it's just for me to add more artists for you to listen to and love, and how amazing they are. That's what this is about. So I'm going to take you through the timeline of all the changes on how from like 1954, it's kind of like the music's more kind of lightly sung. It's not very It's not like very passionate. It's not very like fast like rock and roll is. Like when you think of early rock and roll. Like if you're familiar with if you're um, familiar with early rock and roll, like if you like, everybody always just seems to only know Elvis and they think that's all they know that are my age. It's like no, with early rock and roll, it's almost, if you know Little Richard, and it's very or Chuck Berry, and it's very fast paced, and it has like a lot of drumming, and it's just very that's why it's called rock and roll, because and so it's like, I really don't know how to give an example of how to really, how would you like explain rock and roll to somebody, because rock and roll has evolved so much to where people just use that term so loosely, like, oh, rock, hard rock, soft rock, metal, this rock, acid. It's like there's so many subgenres that it's like, oh my god, okay, this stuff's music and all, but it's not even that. Those aren't real genres, okay? They're rock, yeah, and it's evolved, but it's not rock and roll, okay? The actual definition of rock and roll would be like, Little Richard, Elvis, the Big Bopper, guys like that, which I'm gonna go into, and how, and then it evolved later on into the 60s, the late 60s, the 70s, and all that, and that's not rock and roll anymore. I mean, I guess you could call it that and just say, oh, it evolved, but it's really not rock and roll. Rock and roll is that 50s, like with the piano and the drum, and like and then with the electric guitar and all that stuff that comes in the late 60s and all that stuff, that's rock, don't get me wrong. It's just that it's not rock and roll. It's just like, okay, the early 70s are interesting. I hope this is not confusing, because I'm kind of like just jumping around instead of going in order of the timeline like I'm supposed to be. So I apologize. I'm just kind of giving you like a little of idea of what we're going to be covering. So why I want to stop at the early 70s is because I'll tell you why disco was hated back when it came out. If you ever see the old clips of like Die Disco, and you see people burning disco records and all that stuff, that's because what happened is in 65 and on, we had that revolution where now artists are starting to like branch out and talk about real things, and talk about like, hey, like what's going on in the world and discrimination. Like Marvin Gaye has the song called "What's Going On," and that song is about like, who cares if my hair's long, and like to stop hating and discriminating and all the racial everything that was going on, because you got to remember that there was segregation with black and white people until 1964. That's how recent we look at back then as like, oh, that's 1,000 years ago. It's like, no, that is all modern, all within the last 50 years or 40 years. This is all still current. And he has that song, "What's Going On?" And it's just about everything going on in the world. And so that's an example of how the pop music was changing 65 and on. And then you have the song by Sonny and Cher, like "I Got You Babe," and then you're thinking like, oh, what are you talking about? That's just a love song. It's like, no, there are cultural differences brought up in the song, because Cher says in the song to Sonny, she says, like, "I don't care if your hair's too long." You know what I mean? Meaning like at that time, like men were really discriminated and looked at as a punk and wouldn't get hired and stuff like that for having long hair and growing your hair out, and that was really that big deal. And so she was like, like, "I don't care if your hair's too long, with you I can't go wrong," like that kind of thing. And that was a big, so those are sprinkled in beginning just in 1965. And people think of like, oh, this revolution, they think of like, oh, 1969 and Woodstock and all that. It's like, no, you got to know everything. 65 is really where it started beginning. But my favorite genre of music is 55 to 64, which is that pre era. And it's because that you're thinking like, oh, what are you talking about? You're saying on how repressed it was. It's like, no, it wasn't repressed. Like, yeah, sure, they dressed like in a suit and a dress and all that stuff, and it was very formal looking, but that doesn't portray the music and the lyrics, or the music is the most, if you want to talk about being a teenager, if you want to talk about any age being in love, if you want to talk about heartache, if you want to talk about if you're just passionate and theatrical and with the whole life experience, that's the greatest era of music and the most beautiful.